English translation 908th contact. Wednesday, 19th March 2025, 9:14 hours.
Edouard, greetings, my friend, but today I only come to dictate something to you. It is an article you wrote in 1949, which I found in my grandfather's estate, and it seems important to me that you should include this article in your new book, which you are working on. As I read in the annals, this article was stolen from you at school by your schoolmate and given to teaching assistant Frey, who immediately teamed up with Mrs. My grandfather then kept this article in the teacher's desk, where he had stored it, because it was your property that was stolen from you.
Yes, now that you mention it, I remember that. The two of them intercepted me when I was on my way to Siler Bechi, who had made me a 5-kilometer kite string for free.
Kite string, what is that?
You really don't know. It's good. It's a huge, long, thin string made from hemp. I used it to fly my kite so high and far that it flew in the wind over the whole village of Bulak from Niederflachs, where I lived.
What is a kite, then?
It's a wind-powered flying device, which in German is simply called a Flugdrachen flying kite. Kite flying is ancient, as the first kites were flown in China around 3,000 years ago, so this goes back to a long tradition. According to tradition, flying kites were made from bamboo stems joined together in a cross shape. In Europe, wooden sticks or thin metal tubes are used for this, which were held together on the outside all round with strings, in Europe also thin wires, and covered with silk, which made them a good wing for the wind. This kite structure was attached to a long string and then released into the air and into the wind, where the kite fluttered back and forth depending on the wind. However, there are also Draco kites in the wild in nature, that is to say creatures that are a genus of the lizard family. I will look for a description from the internet and attach it. Wait, please, yes here. The Duden has the following explanation, which I'll add as a note. Note from Duden 2025. Agamon agamidi. However, the genus and its various species are not located in Europe, but in the southwestern part of India, also in Southeast Asia. They have no idea that in the past there were also human-like beings on Earth, faraway travelers, who were regarded as gods. Although I know that the term human-like only refers to the external appearance and internal organic structure, etc., but not to the fact that they were or are real human beings. This just a Sina and Dot.
Interesting. But I think you should perhaps mention that at your birthday meeting with us on ERA, various people from our federation had several.
No, that's exactly what I don't want, because it suffices with this that I'm not only considered a charlatan, like even a lunatic, a fraud, and also a...
But you should defend yourself against that.
That would be pointless, because with the Earthling, once an opinion has been formed, which is nothing more than a belief, it remains and is possibly spread worldwide. Unfortunately, that was already the case when I was a boy, when, I'm sorry to say, the thing about the destroyed planets between Mars and Jupiter was spread by those who traveled far and wide, and also that the majority of the population at that time fled to the planet Mars, which at that time bore life.
There is quite a bit about this in my grandfather's annals, but what I have read so far, it only refers to the flight of populations to Mars. If you can tell me some things about Dot.
I can briefly, for from Svath's explanation I can tell you the following, which he said should not remain a secret, and moreover, I have already spoken about it in my youth. But I don't want to go on talking about what I'm explaining to you now. I'm only doing it for your sake. That's why I will also only mark it with dots in our conversation report. But I only want to tell you what I still remember, because unfortunately my memory has deteriorated somewhat at my age, and my stroke has also played a part. So let me begin briefly. When the existence of the refugees or their distant descendants became impossible there, on Mars, because the planet began to strike and life was no longer possible, the descendants of the former refugees later fled to the primeval and quite hostile Earth, where, however, after a few millennia they were taken away by those who had traveled far away and thus disappeared from the Earth's surface again. That was about 1 or 2 million years ago or so. Then, Over the last 1.2 or 1.3 million years, various far travelers, human-like beings from various parts of the cosmos, appeared several times from the vastness of deep space or from real space. And some groups of them finally settled down around 385,000 years ago, from which Homo sapiens ultimately developed over a long period of time with their help. While the Earthling only developed in its primordial formation about 45 million years ago, from a still animal-like life form, which, however, never had anything to do with apes, from which the Earthling is supposed to have emerged, as the fraudster Charles Darwin claimed. Together with Svath, I was able to excavate the fossilized skeletons of such early beings in a mine in northern Europe, at least one of which he has kept. And very much of what he allowed me to see and experience during his time at various times, very much and for me very interestingly different, does not correspond to what is often presented today by the theories of so-called scientists, whose assumptions correspond to nothing more than childish fantasies.
I am aware of this from my own experience, because some of the things from grandfather's annals some friends and I, have scrutinized in detail, whereby we have also come across foreigners whose acquaintance we had to avoid, however, and continue to do so, in accordance with our directives that for safety reasons we should never make contact with them in the Dern universe, and so they can also not find their way into our anchor universe. But this is all known to you and also incumbent upon you that you would ever violate these directives if.
I am aware and have been aware of that since Svath's times. Consequently, I will be careful not to ever Besides, I am safeguarded against that, because Svath made sure that my memory would be blocked immediately, and everything even denied if something wanted to be extracted from me by apparatus, or by force, etc., or by hypnosis.
I am also familiar with this procedure, what you have endured. That proves to all of us the responsibility you took on early in your life, which goes far beyond what?
No need to mention that.
I suppose you're right about that. But that which you explained to me, and unfortunately brought you evil in your adolescence, I don't want you to replace that with dots, because I think the whole thing should be said openly.
I'm sure it will be again.
That will perhaps be so, I find that it is important to be said once openly.
Maybe, frankly, I don't know. It might start the trouble from back then again, I really don't know.
That shouldn't bother you, as you've always kept it that way because you know the truth. But now I want to dictate to you your article from 1949, which I found in my grandfather's estate, which he took from your teacher's desk, and which he specifically noted should be preserved. It wasn't right what he did, but grandfather noted that it was necessary because he thought that this article should be preserved. And I think that as well as it should be included in your new book, which is why I'm dictating it to you now.
Yeah, wait a minute, I didn't know that. I mean, Svath trolled Frey for the article again. That's why I only now know why the guy was raving and shouting when he realized that there was nothing left in his teacher's desk, which was always locked because nobody could take anything out, or would have had to have broken open the drawer, which wasn't the case. He obviously couldn't explain how the item, which was clearly important to him, for reasons I can't define, could disappear without a trace.
My grandfather didn't write anything about that. But now, Edward, I have to dictate the article to you, because I still have a duty to fulfill. So now I will begin to dictate.
Okay, but I'm sure you know that Ptah was here briefly the day before yesterday to get back to me. It was 17th March around 3:20 p.m., and he said that he would be back as usual in the next few days. But for now, he still had a few things to sort out.
He was also with us, so consequently I am informed, as are Bermunda, Florina, and Injana. But now I want to tell you that what Ptah told you is that some of the vaccines against the corona rampantly spreading disease were prepared to somewhat decimate the peoples of all states.
I know that effective poisons were used for this purpose, which also led to horrific deaths. As far as I know, there were over 22 million worldwide, but this is still concealed from the public to this day. It is obvious, at least to me, that what was done in China by the Americans in the 1970s with regard to the development of a rampantly spreading disease is more than just insane revenge. All of this just to take revenge on the American people, who were actually not to blame, but only the US government. What happened as a result of several accidents in 3 laboratories, the last one in Wuhan, where the rampantly spreading disease was spread, still seems to be a mystery to the idiots of know-it-alls who were supposed to clarify everything. In addition to the SARS rampantly spreading disease, many other diseases and mutations occurred across 3 laboratories, but then the corona pandemic was triggered in Wuhan, which was again caused by an infectious accident. Well, greed encouraged everything so that the rampantly spreading disease could still spread and mass deaths were claimed. But the state leaders did nothing about these mass murders, which they actually were. The Swiss rulers were also so lowly intelligent that they simply allowed themselves to be lulled into complacency and did nothing real, but exactly the opposite. First, everything was adulterated with distilled water. Then the vaccinations were deliberately contaminated in part by supporters of who fully agreed with his eradication plan and knew everything, which meant that his plan still worked halfway. This resulted in all kinds of mischief, which continues to this day and will continue for a long time to come. But people are keeping quiet about it.
As I noted, this practice is common among all state leaders on Earth, namely that the peoples are kept lowly intelligent and therefore ignorant, because everything is kept secret that the peoples, however, ought to know. It is to me quite incomprehensible and unacceptable that something like this can happen and be tolerated by the peoples of Earth. Because denying them governance information means, as you say, that they are being patronized, and worse than, as you also often say, slaves who are being vassalized. Something that does not happen on ERA or in our entire Federation. This kind of leadership, which truly is not, causes discontent and strife, which ultimately leads to war.
I know that, but the consequences of what we were talking about earlier, namely the corona rampantly spreading disease or the vaccination. I want to show you this, for example, from the woman born in 1966 in the USA, which was sent to me.
Billed $7.5 million after a free COVID shot.
Tonya Marie Johnson was an administrative assistant for the state of Nevada. Prior to passing away, she was bedridden and unable to walk due to an unexplained illness following the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine. Her weight dropped to 70 pounds. Her stomach and spleen were removed. She had clots in her legs and lungs, paralysis, vertigo, etc. My family has been billed over $7.5 million in hospital bills. Insurance covered most of the bills, but some weren't covered due to structural guidelines, causing family bankruptcy. Look how frail she is, such a horrible way to leave this world. May she rest in peace.
This is really viciously bad.
I think so also, and it is really bad with what has been done by the adulteration with the vaccines. I also think it's catastrophic that vaccines have been mixed with, because apart from the fact that they cause cancer and, in German, the vaccinated die miserably, it is more than just criminal. There's no other way to put it, and what Pa also told me is, but I'm only telling you that. If humanity is to be reduced as a result of massive overpopulation, which already numbers 9,650,000,000, then not by murder, neither in this, nor in other likewise, nor in similar ways. Contrary to the humanity spinning clock, which only counts about 8 billion Earthlings, my proposal of a worldwide, officially controlled and multi-year birth freeze would certainly be conceivable, and probably the only correct and humane solution to overpopulation reduction. This world population reduction would allow the planet, nature, and its fauna and flora, etc., and thus creation, to slowly recover.
This would require human beings to free themselves from their selfishness and develop understanding and reason, which effectively only a few have been capable of for a long time and are currently capable of, which at least does not include the leaders of the state. Otherwise, they would have already done something sensible about the horrendous mass of overpopulation in the course of the late last century. I don't want to say any more about this. But now, dear friend, I want to dictate your articles to you, which I find very interesting and which prove to me, which makes me wonder what you learnt from my grandfather and what knowledge you already possessed at that time. But now I want to start and dictate to you, but we can't manage everything today, which is why I have to come back several times to do everything.
Alleged rebirth checked for correctness. Svarth Wednesday, 16th April, 1947. Niederflax, 1253. Ulark.
The first thing to be brought up is the so-called rebirth, and to serve to clarify that this does not and also cannot exist, because the creation energy form is a form which is, so to speak, a particle of the energy and power of creation. This energy with its power existing in it cannot become flesh. Consequently, it cannot be reborn as a human being. Because as an eternally existing creation, life energy, it is absolutely pure energy with great power, but not material like the human being, which it animates and which is transient. After dying, and therefore when death has occurred, the body dissolves, decays, and fades away, leaving only the bones. And so when the life energy of creation escapes from the material human body and it becomes lifeless, it is dead. As pure energy and power, the body cannot be reborn, but it is given to it, like every kind of life form, that it must be animated by the creation life energy. Consequently, only through this does the body have life energy. This is not only the case with human beings, but also with all animals, all creatures, and every other life form, which can only live and exist through the life energy of creation. However, with regard to the body, this is only according to the form of energy and strength that are measured by the body itself and according to its constitution, etc. All this, however, is not transferred after death through a rebirth into a body that is reborn in the same way after death, or changed in terms of creation energy. Because in this sense, there is no rebirth, which is impossible at all. As an example, the following is to be explained with regard to the fact that there is no rebirth in the sense that, for example, when a human being has died, he will be born again as the same person sooner or later and will therefore lead another life. The basic explanation is that on the 21st day after conception, the creational life energy, which has only developed further for a certain period of time in the creational energy level intended for this purpose, integrates itself into the new life form to be created and thus into an absolutely new personality, whereby the life force of the new embryo becomes active, and this is also provided with the factor of consciousness through the creational life energy. This creates a harmonious, cohesive whole that determines a tribal function from which everything can be organized, structured, and cooperatively integrated and controlled in all processes of life. Consciousness thus integrates itself into the new life and successfully combines all material and creative energetic factors, enabling absolutely smooth cooperation. This results in the formation of the wholeness of the full function of the human being's consciousness, which can necessarily develop the synapses of his brain through the necessary networking and interconnections to the absolute ability of the thinking function, reasoning, understanding, and reasoning as well as logic. The example given is based on the fact that the whole life and existence of the entire creation, which is nature, fauna and flora, the universe, the stars, planets and moons, meteors, comets, and the entire cosmos, the universe and all existence in general, is equally built and exists on the principle of becoming and passing away. And just as the creation energy of life is a part of creation energy itself, so it animates every single life form, without exception, throughout the universe, and therefore also women and men. Now, the effective fact is that everything that happens in this respect in the actual realm of creation life energy also arises in natural life, and the entire plant world is organized within it. It is the practice of creation that what arises in the realm of the creation energy levels with regard to the creation life energy, with regard to the life forms moving in the existence of life itself, namely, that these continue to develop in their form as creation life energy resting in the creation energy realm. This happens by working through or processing what has been held and stored in the consciousness during the lifetime. This is an evolutionary process that occurs with all creation life energy, which animates life forms that are self perpetuating through material life and thus belong to the fauna. However, the beings of the flora, that is to say, the plant world, which includes everything from the smallest plant to the giant tree, do not belong to the fauna. Their creation life energy is of a different kind with regard to evolution, because it does not evolve towards a new life in the creation energy realm, because it develops by the leaves of trees or the blossoms of flowers and herbs, etc., withering and falling off, while the root system goes into a dormant state for a certain time, only to awaken again to green and new life. This is at least the case with those plants that have a perennial lifespan, such as grass, etc. But there are also fruit trees and fruit bushes that shed their ripe fruit, or are plucked, which then simply go dormant, only to green up and flower again, thereby producing new fruit. The root system of the plants, which forms new regenerating energy and strength during the period without growth or after the harvest period in the following resting phase, so that the plants can blossom again and bear fruit once more, can be understood in comparison to the resting phase and its processing of all the stored knowledge of the life energy of creation. Thus, there is an equality between the material with regard to the development of the truly absolutely new personality that arises through the resting learning pause of the creation life energy, as well as their awakening plant, such as the simple blade of grass or any other plant. So, in this way, exactly the same is given, whereby only the wise is different. On the one hand, materially impure creation energetic form for all mobile, self moving life forms, but on the other hand, also for all life forms that are bound to a place and cannot move independently. Immediately after the death of the body, the consciousness reunites with the creation life energy that is absolutely appropriate only for it, and also with the creation energy level in the realm of the effectively countless creation energy levels that are only assigned to the respective entity genera species in the universe space or creation realm. This is in order to fully process all the countless knowledge experiences gathered in their previous existence over a longer or shorter period of time. In this respect, everything that has arisen in the personality or human being during their existence in consciousness, in the same way as in animals, creatures, or other life forms. In this sense, Truth and understanding are processed. The creation life energy learns in peace. The knowledge experiences that it has acquired and processes in the creation energy level. The acquired knowledge experience of the previous existence as consciousness in a material body of a new personality or human being, such as an animal, creatures, or other life form, which also have a kind of instinct consciousness. But this, according to their genus or species, is thus processed, as it is then stored for all time in the creation life energy, and this then evolves as a result. This in turn benefits the next new personality, which may be sexually different from the previous or deceased one, which is enlivened by the further evolved creation life energy and unconsciously becomes more advanced and more evolved through the knowledge of consciousness working in it. However, the form of creation life energy that animates a human being's consciousness in terms of creation energy and thus also the corresponding personality that is formed by it is shaped by the human being himself. This takes place through his thoughts, actions, behavior, and actions, etc., in his self determining value or unvalue, consequently, through his self education and self forming. This is given to the consciously thinking and acting human being, as it is to the animal, animalistic, or other life forms, according to their genus and species, only through instinctive consciousness. And so, when, after the conception of a new human life, the pregnancy reaches the appropriate point in time with the 21 days of development for the creation life energy to enter the embryo, then it is animated, which also marks the beginning of the formation of the internal organs, and thus the previous stage of fetal development, which then ends with hatching or birth. With the entry of the creation life energy into the embryo of the completely foreign and new body, which really has absolutely no relation to the previous body, its personality and life, everything is now new. With the entry of the creation energy, the form of consciousness also arises from it, which is universal, creation energetic, and located in the brain area, but not as a brain organ, but as pure creation energy. Consciousness works throughout life according to the state and ability, as well as the use of the brain organ. That is to say, it can be used and work in a highly efficient, subdued, conscious, subconscious, confusing, even pathological, etc. way. After a longer or shorter period of time, when all knowledge experience has been processed, a consciousness and thus a new personality is revived, which is conceived as a human being by human beings, by man and woman. This happens when a sperm cell or sperm of the man fertilizes an egg cell of the woman, whereby such fertilization normally takes place in her fallopian tube, provided that a healthy egg cell is expelled from the ovary, and thus a so-called ovulation takes place in this wise, and the egg cell is actually absorbed by the fallopian tube. After conception, a so-called yolk sac is formed within a few days, after which the embryo emerges after a certain time in the womb, which forms naturally during the developmental stage and lies within the amniotic sac laterally under the uterine lining. This is also where most of the internal organs and external body structures develop. This natural process is formed before all time, before the actual life. The life energy of creation enters the embryo, which occurs on the 21st day after conception or fertilization of an egg. When the creation life energy enters the embryo on the 21st day after conception, an energy impulse occurs that immediately leads to independent life, through which the new consciousness is also awakened. After this, actual life begins in the womb, whereby the embryo grows, becomes larger, and thus begins the so-called embryonic stage, which lasts around 8 weeks, during which the embryo develops into a fetus, which takes place around 9 weeks after fertilization. Then, usually 9 months after fertilization, the developing fetus is born as a baby. After birth, this baby grows and becomes an adult human being, who is supplied with the life energy of creation throughout its development and lifespan until it dies. That is to say, until the time of its death, and thus before the decay of the material body. What is to be understood as a whole, checked for correctness. Svath Wednesday, 20th April 1949, Eddie Meier, Niederflags 1253, Bülach. I want to record in writing what I have learned from my wise teacher Svath in order to let those human beings know one day who are interested in the effective reality and truth, and who are interested in becoming a truthful human being. But my words should also clarify many aspects of what I have experienced and learned from Svath, and what I have seen and experienced together with him when we have fathomed reality and truth in old and new times. The human being's evolutionary task, as I have learned, is to build himself up as a materialized creation life energy form in all that is good and positive, in such a way that all the energy and power of the life impulse is constantly able to assert itself better and stronger, and also more intensively. However, this is only possible if the human being continuously educates himself through his independent learning, and thereby recognizes and gets to know reality and the effective truth, and also fully understands it. This, as he necessarily turns away completely from all beliefs of any kind and makes conscious thoughts and logical decisions, and moves through his life by acting justly, clearly, and worthily. What human beings have to learn as a whole, and thereby become aware of what living and learning to live really means, and how they should live and lead their lives effectively, can only be based on the fact that they use creation energy and its power in their daily lives and allow it to manifest within them, whereby they can allow all the necessary knowledge to grow within them. However, no religious or worldly beliefs or assumptions and theories are appropriate, suitable, or necessary for this, because an assumption or theory regarding the effective truth and regarding learning, especially regarding the way of life, only ever corresponds to an obstacle. Reality and its truth can never be found in it, and consequently, nothing can also never be confirmed. In particular, an assumption or theory regarding lifestyle always leads to confusion, and, as a result of this, further and further confusion, so that the increasingly confusing problems increase and result in a lack of understanding and swimming in a chaos of thoughts, and in an unparalleled confusion in such a way that every logical solution is pushed away from the correct lifestyle. Consequently, no life situations can ever be practically translated into reality through theories, but it is effectively only realistic and truthful thoughts and the positive realizations arising from them, as well as the resulting actions, that lead to success. This is particularly the case when it comes to learning to make a real and true human being of oneself through one's own insights, energy, and strength. This requires a great deal of understanding, tolerance, and true neutrality towards oneself, but also joy and perseverance, as well as honesty towards one's own personality. It is also very necessary that the important work to be done in terms of thoughts, feelings, and behavior is done with enthusiasm, generosity, and an honest willingness to help oneself. However, this is also necessary with regard to a right and good cooperation with a close acquaintance, as well as with unknown fellow human beings, because empathy and comprehensive and, of course, forbearance are also necessary. This is just as important as loyalty and real and honest love, but also understanding for oneself, as well as the knowledge and awareness of creation itself, which is the total existence of everything visible and tangible, but also everything invisible and intangible, everything that exists, and therefore not the work of a religious imaginary God, as deluded people erroneously and delusionally imagine this imaginary figure and worship it, begging and pleading. Well, there is no God creator, but only the true creation, which is everything and everyone. The whole of nature, with all its fauna and flora all around, as well as everything that exists on all sides of the universe and all dimensions in general, in sevenfold form, as Sfath teaches. And this teaching of his also conveys that diverse life exists in the universe, in everything and everyone, in every matter, in water, in every stone, and even in ice, in which viruses, worms, and the microscopically tiny living organisms bacteria, which are also microbes, can be found, along with their genetic and functional potential, if they are released sooner or later and can then begin to take effect. These are tiny individual cells that do not have a nucleus. And all this life has developed on Earth and adapted to earthly conditions, like all life in general, right up to the life form of the human being. But the origin of it was brought here from outer space, namely by comets, meteors, and asteroids, but also from outer space itself. For this is probably empty of air, but countless and diverse species of amino acids, microbes, viruses, and even microalgae and plant ear seeds, etc., are buzzing around in it. They drift onto planets, moons, comets, meteors, asteroids, and other space travelers, inseminating them and causing everything to fall onto planets and spread. If these float down on planets that are capable of gaining a foothold, then they develop and thrive. Consequently, they emerge from the energy and power of the planet and are therefore planetary in every form, but were originally brought here from outer space, from where they also enter the solar system and its planets, etc., and unfold according to possibility and thus become planetary. Through the evolution of blown seeds from outer space, or brought here by comets, meteors, or asteroids, millions of fauna and flora are formed. But here and there, it is also the case that life forms that have traveled far and wide bring seeds and other things with them when they are able to travel through outer space. This, such as human beings or human like life forms that are humanoids, that is to say, human like, but not human beings in the sense that corresponds to Earth humans, the Homo sapiens. The lineage of the Ur-humans does not descend from an ape lineage, as Charles Darwin's theory claims, because the evolved Earth humans developed in a special way from the ground up in various life form phases with a DNA specially adapted to them, as it exists in the entire realm of life of all life forms, in all matter belts in sevenfold dimensions of creation itself. This results in all life forms, without exception, being provided with DNA in the entire matter belt realm of their species. Note Wikipedia, March 2025. Explanation: deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA for short, is a macromolecule made up of 4 different deoxyribonucleotides in the form of a double helix. The DNA contains the genes that code for the structure of all proteins and therefore contains almost all the information required for cell function. This also applies to all those human beings who traveled further afield, as well as to all the various human-like life forms that came to Earth, whose bodies were reptilian or animal-like, and who were generally regarded and worshipped as new gods by the Earth humans, some of whom were distant descendants of those who traveled further afield and had forgotten their ancestors. This, as Earth humans have done since time immemorial with human beings of the Earth, who brought teachings or heresies, turned them into circles of faith and religions of faith, etc., and found followers for them, some of whom were strictly fanatical, and others even dangerous to the point of murder. This is because religions and their beliefs were invented and spread from the ground up, all based on false doctrines: Gewalt, Ausartung, murder, and manslaughter. Just as every worldly belief has brought nothing but death, strife, misery, revenge, and misery since time immemorial, and also continues to bring greed and wars, which will continue to be the case. Religions and other religious groups have existed since time immemorial and will continue to exist for a very long time and will continue to provide the reason for shaping and abusing politics in such a way as to cause wars and terror, as well as to boost the arms industry and engage in immense military armament, as will once again be the case, especially in the third millennium, as a result of a worldwide war mania. The world domination addicts and the fear and delusion of the incompetent leaders of many states will be particularly guilty of this and will trigger the hoarding of military equipment. This will be no different and will cause much strife in this respect alone, just as family feuds will also lead to murder and manslaughter elsewhere. Religious hatred or hatred of faith, as well as worldly faith, which invariably only consists of views and opinions, will be created once again, whereby Christians and Jews in particular will once again make a name for themselves full of hatred, and believers in Islam will start to stir up trouble, causing thousands of people of other faiths to lose their lives and in this sense commit religious murders or murders of faith and simply harass people of other faiths. And as it was in the Nazi war, it will be again. Only this time, it will be in this one that the distant descendants of those persecuted and murdered in this war will wield the sword of death, equally against those of other faiths as against those who pay homage to Islam, commanded by a Nazi corpse who will be the author of death. What is already modernizing in this wise today will certainly come shortly after the second decade of the new millennium, and renewed hatred will arise worldwide and be directed against the distant descendants of the Torah believers. Consequently, just as their earlier ancestors have always been hated and persecuted since time immemorial, murdered by the millions in the Nazi war, they will continue to fall prey to the vendetta, for it will be nothing else. And that will be the case, as will also be the case with regard to many other wars and political terror, namely religion-related, as well as greed for territory, greed for wealth, obsession with power, and evil reasons of state, as well as all kinds of other state and civil crimes and much violence, strife, malice, and other ausarting of all kinds, etc. Great extinctions will occur in nature and its fauna and flora and in the whole of creation in general, for the growing earth humans will destroy everything. The existence of nature with all its fauna and flora, as well as all the existence of the visible and invisible, is creation, and this has nothing whatsoever to do with an unreal, religious, imaginary, and therefore non existent God and God Creator, who is to be worshiped, adored, and implored by believers in religion or God because he is supposed to protect and help. What is truly important is the human being himself, who should think, act, rule, and have might over himself and protect and help himself at all times through his own energy, strength, logic, understanding, and reason. This requires that man himself strives for his own advancement by educating himself in all necessary ways and changing himself for the good and the correct in such a way that he transforms himself into a true human being and humanity, and shows it the necessary honor, respect, and dignity. The human being, however, should urgently take this seriously and necessarily tackle and implement this change in the foreseeable future in order to save what can still be saved. But unfortunately, he will not do so, which will lead to bad consequences in the long term. Soon, new wars and other disasters will sweep across various peoples and states on Earth, bringing endless suffering and misery. The climate will also change and bring many disasters, deaths, tremendous storms, destruction, and, in the north of the earth, great heat and forest fires, which will bring hardship and destruction to America in particular with regard to the great forests, as well as to various states in the Far East, but also in many other states around the world where forests are an important part of the land. Elsewhere, other states will be hit by major droughts, which will mean that the land will not recover for years, causing everything to wither and die out, and then also become devoid of human beings. And what I want to say for the future, what Svath and I have seen and experienced will be evil and very bad, with many evils, deaths, and wars being created by an emerging artificial intelligence, which will lead to disaster in some places. And too many human beings will cause the atmospheric conditions and the land and even the soil kingdom as well as the necessary water conditions to change, and the land will even dry up in many places because the rains will also fail to fall, as once happened on Rapa Nui, for example. And truly, through Earth humans' own fault, there is a threat of near destruction worldwide in the coming time, just as there is also a threat from solar space that will create fear, horror, death, destruction, and other calamities. And further disaster will soon begin in Korea in just 10 months' time, carried out and interfered with as the Western world domination addicts have done since time immemorial. With the start of what is to come in Korea, the course of what will only mean doom will begin, namely, the very long lasting epic of war mania that will reach far into the third millennium and spread to the governments of many countries. The guilt of this madness will be triggered solely by the Western world domination addicts, which originally began with the irresponsible dropping of nuclear bombs. But what will happen again in Korea will then trigger an unstoppable war mania, which will ensnare many heads of state and otherwise evil, power-hungry military leaders, politicians, and populations, and this will be unstoppable for a very long time, well into the next millennium. And the majority of the peoples of all states will be responsible for this because, in their indifference and irresponsibility, they will appoint the power hungry and those incapable of leadership as their national administrators and leaders as well as rulers in ballots, without those elected as responsible not caring, and without anyone endeavoring to find out how, who, and what those to be elected basically are. As a result, in practically every case, only those who are greedy for power and weak in character and absolutely incapable of leadership are elected to governments, or those who are incapable in this way can sneak or hoist themselves into governments as rulers by force or lies and deceit. Since time immemorial, these have actually all been male domains, with a few exceptions. But this will change in the future, because in the coming times women will rise higher and might come to power. But nothing will change with regard to miserability, and thus the inability to lead. Consequently, all the inability to lead will not change, and will also remain the same in the future. Many of the mad leaders of the European and global states will be cheered by the majority of peoples struck by low intelligence and will in future turn to the world domination addicts from the West, who have been indulging in their bloody and war-driven addiction mania since their early existence in 1776 and have been doing so for around 170 years. In this spirit, they also leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki with atomic bombs 4 years ago, murdering many hundreds of thousands of human beings in the process. This is despite the fact that the Western world domination addicts are strictly religious and have many religious sects, but nevertheless exhibit unparalleled criminality, just as they also unspeakably and irresponsibly murder masses of people all over the world through wars and interference in the politics of foreign countries, secret service, and military with impunity, which the majority of Earth humans do not care about in indifference. And this will continue decade after decade for all the years to come, and decades of the 20th century that is still to come. Consequently, it will be absolutely and completely certain that all those who have been characterized and obsessed by the mad mania for war and the extremely greedy and sick delusion of world domination since time immemorial, that many like-minded people, as well as descendants of the criminals of the World War just 4 years ago, will bring forth new wars, and these will further plunge the world into misery and hardship. This will happen especially when, in the new millennium of the third decade, the madness of the leadership of the world domination addicts from the West will nonsensically threaten the world and its economy. As a result, the new and insane state leadership will bring its own country into a negative position, which will then come dangerously close to a dictatorship due to confused megalomania and lust for power, as well as a damaged, sick mind and irrationality. And this will almost lead to a situation like the one that was created early on two planets, resulting in the asteroid belt. This was the case when the first human-like life forms lived at different times, around 2 million years ago or a little more, on the planets in the Sol system, which lie opposite each other in the same orbit between the giant planet Jupiter and the Earth-like planet Mars. These came one after the other, completely destroying their home planets as a result of their hostilities and hurling their large fragments into the vast space of the honeycomb cosmos as giant asteroids. The same thing will happen as a result of the irrationality and greed for power, and also as a result of the insane self-importance of human beings, especially through the greed of the powerful state rulers who enrich themselves from the peoples, who will only hoard mammon instead of fulfilling their governmental duty and avoiding any kind of war and other mass murder or murder at all. This, as well as the ever increasing indifference and complete irresponsibility of the endlessly increasing Earth humans, also threatens a sad and very evil future for the Earth in the future, and what will come especially and inevitably after the next millennium. This will happen if logic, understanding, and reason do not prevail, and the responsibility for the preservation of the planet, nature, and its fauna and flora, and for the existence of all life is not properly realized. If Earth humans do not finally remove their power-hungry state leaders, who are absolutely incapable of leading states, but only enrich themselves and indulge their delusional desires according to their senses and desires, and bring honest state leaders to the governments through real elections and knowledge of the character and behavior of those to be elected, then things will become bad in the world in the future, to which an artificial intelligence will also contribute. Unfortunately, however, the majority of people will lack understanding and reason, and consequently, all the evils will become even greater, especially because it will be the fault of incompetent rulers who fail to order and implement measures to ensure that Earth humans come to their senses and keep this rationality low and do not go overboard, so that all life in nature and its fauna and flora is not endangered and even wiped out, which is already in the offing. But my words will be useless and will simply fade away in the desert of not wanting to be heard. I will be cursed and hated because the truth will not want to be heard and will not see how slowly but surely everything is decaying and going down the drain. Slowly and insidiously, human beings become indifferent, mendacious, uneducated, addicted to alcohol and poisons, and fall more and more into the religious and worldly delusion of faith. But the craze for great wealth and physical beauty, fornication, personal prestige, sports addiction, and other addictions of all kinds will also become rampant in the future, and none of the addicts will notice the damage that results. The addiction to faith, religious or secular, which eliminates our very own real thinking, thus atrophies the brain to such an extent that only a very small part of it remains. Brain to such an extent that it is only given a very small amount of space for illusory thinking. This is no longer sufficient to recognize and understand the actual reality and its truth, which means that the ability to perceive reality and truth is impaired and undermined, and normal drives and motivations are also impaired. In this way, learning and understanding also diminish more and more, as a result of which stultification or non-thinking becomes more and more entrenched, and only belief continues to express itself in a superficially powerful way. As a result, consciousness becomes overloaded with assumptions, wild fantasies, delusional ideas, misconceptions, and therefore beliefs, so that ultimately no reality and its truth can be perceived, realized, and understood, and only the delusion of faith powerfully retains the upper hand. Those who believe in religion and those who believe in the world do everything they can with their faith based, lies and deceptions to ensure that everything continues to exist within the framework of faith and that everything continues to exist in this respect. Everything continues to live and flourish in this respect, against which nothing, but also nothing at all can be done unless the individual human being willingly learns to think independently in logic, understanding, and reason in order to recognize reality and its truth. However, just as the majority of Earth humans do not do this, but only an absolute minority, which will bring disaster, humanity will also grow to many billions, contrary to reason, which will jeopardize the existence of all life and even wipe out and eradicate many things without any hope of salvation. Something that is to be repeated over and over again, because the growth of Earth humans will lead to the worst catastrophe that has ever taken place in this world. Because the entire creation, that is to say, the planet itself, along with much of nature and its fauna and flora, will be increasingly harassed, destroyed, and largely annihilated. Everything will consequently be in danger of destruction in less than just 80 years. That is to say, just a few decades after the beginning of the third millennium. This is because, by then, the mass of Earth humans will have irresponsibly grown to 10 billion, and most of creation on Earth will have been damaged and destroyed, such as the planet through the exploitation of resources and overbuilding, etc. This, as well as nature and the environment, will be destroyed. This, as well as nature and its flora and fauna, of which more than 55% will have been wiped out by the beginning of the new millennium. This, together with the poisoning of all the waters of the Earth's land and seas, and everything else that will be destroyed, as well as all the regions of the glaciers and the ice on the poles. And furthermore, it is to be said for the future of Earth humans that they will not be so far developed in their technology in the foreseeable future that they will be able to reach outer space, the real outer space, despite the efforts soon to begin to reach solar space and the moon with primitive rockets. Thus, it will not be possible for large parts of humanity to flee Earth and colonize other planets, as the many humanity-like beings did millions of years ago, who then colonized the two worlds as distant descendants of the faraway travelers, but then fled from their planets to Mars and then to Earth before their home planets were completely destroyed by hostility and became asteroids. For a very long time to come, the future overflowing numbers of Earth humans will not be able to flee from Earth and settle on Mars. For example, although in a few years' time, efforts will begin to use extremely primitive rocket technology to reach the moon, it will probably be possible to land on the moon with rockets, and even to build an Earth orbiting station that can be operated by a few human beings in order to get from there to the planet Mars again with primitive rockets, but it will never be enough to penetrate into the true universe, into space. It will not even be enough to reach the unexplored end of solar space in the distant future. On the other hand, Earth humans will increase in numbers and become so prevalent in the coming times and far into the next millennium that the planet itself will be very dangerously affected by the overexploitation of natural resources. This will increase the dangers of earthquakes and seaquakes, because the Earth's interior will increasingly shift and its groundwater masses will also be affected, which geologists will continue to deny for a long time, because they will truly not understand what they fundamentally understand and should warn and educate all those who are overexploiting the planet or damaging it in other ways. In the future, South American countries in particular, such as Chile, then Alaska in the north, as well as China and Indonesia, Sumatra, Morocco, Southeast Asia, as well as Greece, Japan, Italy, and Turkey, Persia, and various other particularly vulnerable countries will also be hit by man made earthquakes. Switzerland and Europe in general will also be increasingly exposed to tectonic activity in the coming period of the new millennium, especially, as I said, from the third millennium onwards. Just as earthquakes and also seaquakes will increase worldwide, and atmospheric earthquakes will then also become noticeable, which have not been mentioned so far but will be in the future. Furthermore, the Earth's polar ice masses will soon melt rapidly as a result of climate change and rising temperatures, as will the glaciers around the world, causing large masses of water to rise in the seas. And humidity and clouds will also increase, resulting in violent rainstorms and wild floods and destruction, which will also cause a great deal of suffering and other calamities. Nature and its entire fauna and flora will be impaired and often destroyed, and in some cases, much of the fauna and flora will be completely wiped out. All of this will be the fault of Earth humans, who will multiply en masse in the time to come, and this will provoke indifference, irresponsibility, and stoicism for humanity's downfall, which will be unstoppable unless logic, understanding, and reason prevail against all expectations and can prevent the worst. But the way human beings in all countries are creating future disaster and thus attracting and provoking doom, everything can only get worse, worse, and worse. And just as the majority of humanity, as of old, will shout pro and hurrah in many countries in favor of wars and applaud them, nothing will improve as a result of the warmongering world domination addicts out of fear or false friendship, but will only get worse and worse. Consequently, the disaster will overflow, and the discrepancy to real peace will become ever greater. In the coming period and well into the next millennium, it will be inevitable that after the following and coming decades up to the new third millennium, war after war will occur all over the world, as well as again and again, only sham peace or occupations of states, mainly led by those addicted to world domination, but also many thousands of people will flee from poor countries to the rich, industrialized countries in the north of the planet. And furthermore, shortly after the beginning of the year 2000, the addicted world domination addicts from the West will greedily overthrow another government in order to invade a state in the East by war as a result of lies and deceit with provoked forces from the East. But this will only be the beginning of what the world domination addicts will continue to afford in the future. Namely, that in the third millennium, they will already afford various wars all over the world in the first 3 decades as a continuation of what they will still afford in this millennium. And as a frequent consequence, the coming decades of this current century will be characterized by roaring and howling all over the world, as well as loud hurrahs for the Western world domination seekers, which will continue well into the third millennium. This is because the low intelligence of the peoples does not recognize that the Western addicts of world domination want to devour the whole world. This will be because of fear of the world domination addicts, or because of low intelligence, or because the rulers and peoples are falsely friendly to the West, which wants to seize and dominate all the states of the earth. This will all happen because all the criminal behavior and all the wrongdoing of the world domination addicts will be conceded to and assisted by them, as if they, as a Western might, had a proxy Hanswurst wage war in Eastern Europe in the third decade of the next millennium, with the help of many lowly intelligent and simple-minded and partisan foreign states and parts of their populations, who will provide Buffon, who has been hired by the world domination addicts, with plenty of material for the war caused by the addicts who lust for world domination. This will be in addition to the fact that those in power, the lowly intelligent and the partisan, will also provide immense financial capital, which this hypocritical harlequin will enjoy and enrich himself immensely. The war instigated by the world domination addicts will result in those who are addicted to the war mania and those who are hopelessly submissive out of friendship or fear, as well as warmongering foreign states, surrendering to the delusional world domination addicts and dancing to their tune and doing everything they want at that future time according to their will, lies, and deceit. This is how it will come and become, and it is already predetermined that it will continue for a very long time in the new third millennium. In the process, evil will spread more and more in the world, which will have all the more consequences, and the majority of Earth humans will indulge in religion mendacious violence, crime, warfare, self-profiling, lying and cheating, dishonesty, and the dishonest acquisition of wealth, so that violence and murder will become the order of the day. On the other hand, however, those in power are becoming increasingly helpless in their greed for power and simple-mindedness, as well as in their absolute inability to lead the people, while in their incompetence they will brag with big words, with all the lies and delusions they can think of in order to conceal or whitewash their failures, and lull the people into complacency and try to make them compliant. Through the guilt of religious and worldly faith, and the impoverishment of effective education in terms of general knowledge, etc., Earth humans will become ever more irresponsible, indifferent, unscrupulous, and increasingly foreign to themselves. In the future, this will lead to the fact that the self-discovery of human beings towards true humanity will be completely prevented more and more intensively, because what is important for self-discovery and true human being, and thus also for the correct way of life, will be missing, namely, one's own endeavors and the acquisition of the necessary knowledge and understanding, as well as the necessary realization for this. From above, the government will secretly and underground prevent the education of the majority of Earth humans from becoming ever weaker and more insignificant in terms of their education, so that they can be forced more and more under the thumb of the greed for power of those incompetent rulers who, in this later century, will utilize an artificial intelligence that will already be active in the mid-1980s, but will be concealed from the public. With regard to the destruction of nature and its fauna and flora, it is necessary to understand and accept that this is the basis of all life, because it is through it that the vital existence of all material life forms is possible in the first place, just as it is only through its biodiversity as a fundamental part of creation that all life is permanent. And to know and understand all this is of great importance for human beings, for in all this lies the creational energy and might, which is given as creation energy. And it is this which human beings can always utilize through logic, understanding, and reason, and which enables them to form their own truthful thoughts realistically and also in accordance with reality, and far removed from any religious or worldly belief. Creation energy is not only the existence of all energy and power that guarantees the life of every human being, as well as any other life form, but also the factor of creation energy itself, which evolves inexorably through ever new revitalizations of human beings and of fauna and flora. This evolution takes place continuously as a result of the constant learning of the human being, accomplished by the consciousness of the respective animated person, which is formed by the creation life energy and which continuously learns and acquires knowledge in life. This knowledge is accumulated in the material memory of the brain and is then transferred to the brain through the energy of creation life, directly into the life energy of creation and stored there, because this life energy generator is also the knowledge energy store. This store stores all knowledge for all endless duration, which is created and thus stored by each constantly new personality. Just as this knowledge, as well as the very diverse knowledge of all past personalities, is used again by the next completely new personality in a useful evolutive way, but always only unconsciously. However, how this useful application and utilization is used in a positive or negative way, how it affects, shapes, and forms, is determined by the new personality itself and alone, namely, by how everything is absorbed, applied, and shaped that daily life offers and produces, and what is made valuable or worthless in terms of character. This is especially true with regard to real and true humanity, or the false shaping and molding of the behavior of untrue humanity, which also results in abnormality and even Ausartung. It must be absolutely clear that there will never be a rebirth of the old deceased personality, nor will there be any relationship with it or any other form with the former personality. It must also be absolutely clear that every thought, every form of behavior and action, etc., is neither inherited nor in any way predetermined, etc., because every new personality that is born forms itself according to its own thoughts, behavior, and actions, as well as according to its own character to be formed, etc. Every new personality, that is to say, every human being, forms itself according to how and what it absorbs from its direct and indirect environment, and thus shapes its thoughts, decisions, actions, and behavior. This makes it clear that it is always and in every case the absolutely personal self education that determines everything and every thought, decision, action, and behavior, as well as the attitude and, if no illness prevents it, the reason and intellect of the human being. Thus, every upbringing by parents or other guardians, as well as the influences of other human beings, their ways of thinking, actions, and behavior, etc., are factors that influence a person's thinking. These are factors that influence and shape or not a human being developing in his thinking, disposition, forms, decisions, actions, character formation, and behavior, depending on what he accepts or rejects for himself. In other words, it is determined by whether he evaluates what is offered to him from the outside in a self-educationally positive or negative way, and from this determines his character and his attitude and behavior, etc., in a negative or positive way to be just or unjust, normal or degenerate, positive or negative. So it is never the upbringing of parents, grandparents or other guardians, etc. But always and in every case, if it is not a disease or pathological Ausartung, always the self-education of the human being himself, however he also degenerates or degenerates. All other scientific and psychological explanations are and remain only nonsensical assertions, as they could not be more ignorant and lowly intelligent, as Sfath explains. The human being as such should form himself into a true human being in every form and wise and develop effective integrity in his consciousness in order to be able to live and act in such a way that he can express himself personally with all the standards of his values through his behavior. Developing personal integrity against everything negative is to be understood as loyalty to oneself and one's own righteousness, whereby the human being with integrity lives honestly in his consciousness and acts in such a way that he is always able to express his standards and values honestly in all his personal correct thoughts in all his life, behavior, conduct, and actions. This characterizes absolute personal integrity, which, as loyalty to oneself, proves that absolute integrity and incorruptibility apply to him. Furthermore, integrity also stands for the decency and honesty of human beings, as well as for their righteousness, trustworthiness, absolute reliability, and profound trust. And these are values of true and effective humanity, the high values of which are also true love, peace, and freedom, which must be cherished and nurtured. The effective true human being, which should be learnt from the ground up, from early childhood onwards, but which human beings often only learn with great effort and necessity throughout their lives, because this is what the harsh reality of existence demands. Namely, that everything negative must be rethought and a change towards the positive must take place, in particular towards honest and true humanity. This is because true humanity harbors extremely valuable qualities that are expressed when a person understands another person and empathizes with what is going on inside them and what moves them. In particular, these values are firstly mindfulness and empathy, which must always be characterized by respect and tolerance. Furthermore, honest consideration must also be shown towards other human beings, because these are the absolute core values of what constitutes true human being, which, like true and profound love, as well as true peace and effective freedom, must be cherished and cultivated in all honesty. When we speak of the concept of true and genuine humanity, it goes without saying that it is also associated with humanity, as it also has a broader and narrower meaning, namely, that the whole of true humanity and humanity towards fellow human beings encompasses everything that belongs to or is proper to human beings and relates to them. In this respect, these are all high values that distinguish human beings from animals, creatures, and all other life forms, which also defines the true human being's attitude and disposition, as well as human faults and weaknesses. Unfortunately, this is also linked to the fact that human beings as such make mistakes, because it is said that to err is human, but this does not and must never mean that they behave, think, and also act in an inhuman way. All these values mentioned, as well as many other behavioral values, are the practical themes of the Nakademian teaching, which is the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, which should be learnt by the human beings of Earth, and they should concern themselves with it. and thereby grow within themselves in order to become true human beings and to cultivate true human beingness, and in this way to cultivate the human being, humanity, and in this way to appreciate and honor creation in the existence of all its energy and power of nature and its fauna and flora and its endless existence.
These articles are really amazing to me, because you were only 11 and 12 years old at the time. And as is noted here, my grandfather not only instructed you thoroughly in all the necessary knowledge of these articles, but also checked the content and correctness of what you wrote down as articles from what you had learnt. He also noted this specifically in his annals, as well as that he himself was amazed at how attentive you were and how you described what you had learnt.
You forget that Svath, your grandfather, was a teacher of unrivaled goodness, just as I have never met another human being during my life, since who could also be compared to Svath. Besides, it would have been an unforgivable disgrace for me to be inattentive to my studies and not understand what I had learnt.
I also did not find his equal so far in my life.
Then I'm not the only one who is of that opinion.
Neither am I, because he has also written various other works that are widely distributed among us and in our federation, and are highly appreciated with regard to their far-reaching themes. And these are not only disseminated via our various worldwide information publications, but are also used privately, as you would say, as books that had to be specially made for this purpose, which is unusual, because books have been part of our antiquity for 3 decades. But we cherish them.
I didn't know that. But then again, it is not necessary for me to know much about what goes on with you on Era and in your federation. But what you said about Svath is really worth knowing.
I understand that.
Not only was he like a second father to me, but he was also the best friend I ever had. And on top of that, he was a teacher to me like no other I could have found on Earth.
In terms of friendship, he recorded roughly the same thing about you in his annals, despite your young age. You were indeed like a son to him, but your friendship, he noted, was much more to him, for he called it honorable, and never before experienced in this wise.
Thank you,
That is so. I see.
Yes. But look here, I received something that was written to Bernadette and is apparently the fruits of our labor.
Extract from an email dated 15.3, 2025.
Recently, I have found myself in a state in which I really feel at one with everything that exists. I have felt this very strongly recently, and I realize that it is not a self-generated feeling. It is as if I feel an unseen connecting cord and a delicate weave of connectedness of supreme joy, freedom, harmony, and peace. I feel powerfully drawn into and unclosed in the present, naked reality and actuality of truthful existence. There is no lack of a continuous joyful smile on my face at the moment, as you may have already read from my vigor and general enthusiasm in the first email. Simply existing and living gives me inexplicable joy, and when I also realize the first thought of creation within me, everything seems like a boundless infinity. My love for and for creation has become a fixed certainty within me. I cannot find words to describe it. I have never felt the sensations I am currently experiencing in such a pronounced and profound way. How can I put it? There are no words to describe them. B.
This is really very gratifying indeed.
I also think so.
That is really the case.
Well, then I have this. Once again, I was asked about the alleged psyche, which I wrote something about back in 2023, which I sent to the person at the time, who then aligned herself with what I wrote. She gave her psychiatrist the boot and aligned herself with what I wrote to her. Last December, I received an email full of words of thanks that everything is now over and good and fine, and that in future only what I had written would be followed. Unfortunately, I didn't have the whole thing corrected, so there are still spelling mistakes in it. But that is not so important. But now I would like to read the whole thing to you here.
Creation energy, consciousness, psyche.
Creation energy animates the personality and consciousness, and from consciousness emerges what is called psyche, which is not an organ but only a state of thinking, whereby the state of psyche is formed by thoughts. Thoughts, however, also contain the energy and power that feelings are triggered by them, and then exist as a decisive part of the psyche state. It is therefore completely wrong to assume that the psyche is a component or an organ or the like of the body. For the psyche is truly and effectively only a status or a validity of what the human being creates for himself, mentally and emotionally. Consequently, it is the case that, depending on how the human being shapes his thoughts and thus also his feelings, either positively or negatively, his so-called psyche state has a negative or positive effect, and consequently forms a moral high or low. The human being's mood and state of mind also inevitably results from this, namely in such a way that his thoughts and feelings also have a positive or negative effect on his consciousness. In this wise, the most important factors that human beings create through their thoughts and feelings express themselves and thus shape the state of mind that only human beings really create for themselves, namely through how and what they develop mentally and emotionally, and how they shape and bring about their personal moral state. The human being evolves or develops, or he devolves and harms himself by turning to this or that learning material in a controlled manner through his thoughts and feelings and devoting himself to it, thereby becoming more knowledgeable. This relates to and affects his so-called mental state, which, however, is only shaped by his thoughts and feelings, depending on whether these have negative or positive values. It should be explained that by thinking and developing feelings from this, the human being creates an impression and an understanding, which together also affects the consciousness, which stores everything and is thus preserved, but which also affects the state of personal morality. And this is done with regard to the corresponding negative or positive nature, so that everything degenerates positively or negatively according to how the thoughts and the feelings arising from them are formed. The thoughts and ideas also give rise to the resulting feelings, which manifest themselves as a mental state, and thus represent what moves human beings at the center of their ego and from which the so-called mental state is formed. It is therefore fundamental to understand that this state can only come about because creation energy enlivens the consciousness of the personality and thus offers human beings the opportunity to use this energy and power to create thoughts and feelings, either positive or negative, depending on the free will of the human being. If he shapes them in the positive, then his personal ego values and his moral state increase to high joy values and good feeling values, etc. But if the human being shapes his thoughts and feelings in the negative, then evil and bad ego values are created in the opposite direction, and these lead to a personal bad and evil moral state. Thus, the cultivation of thoughts and the creation of feelings in a positive wise, as well as life itself, are maintained in a good function and thus knowingly evolutionized. Or, if thoughts and feelings are created in a bad and negative wise, then everything becomes devolutionary. The so-called psyche state is thus formed out of consciousness, and this is nothing other than the state that results from positive or negative thoughts and feelings that can only be regulated and molded into the correct paths by the human being who created them. This does not require so-called psychiatrists or any medication to put everything back in order and become healthy again, if a human being has a mental moral or if they are mentally ill. But they only need to resort to their logic, their mind, and their reason to cultivate their thoughts and feelings in a positive way again, and consequently leave out everything negative in this regard. Of course, this takes a lot of time and rest. Often, if the demolished thought-feeling state is profound, even 2 or 3 years, or even 4. But in fact, it doesn't take money-hungry psychiatrists who can never help, but only yourself to put your own negative thoughts and feelings back in order. Negative thoughts and feelings back into order by bringing everything and everyone back to the best state of positive thoughts and feelings, and making your health whole and smiling again. The human being alone determines his or her own condition, which is so-called psychic, through thoughts and feelings that are formed and nurtured in the negative or positive. Creation energy alone ensures that the consciousness of human beings functions as part of their personality, and that the thoughts and feelings that emerge from it determine the so-called psyche state and keep it functioning. The human being is solely responsible for himself in this respect, who, as explained, determines through his thoughts and feelings in a wise way that everything is normal, good and positive, or whether negative thoughts and bad feelings cause a bad moral state that is even detrimental to the body and health. Good and positive thoughts and feelings at all times, which bring about an objective, life-affirming mental state, are what every human being needs in every situation, and this is something that should always be taken care of, one way or another. The personality and the consciousness, like the fantasized psyche, which exists only in words, are much more and completely different in their function than is generally claimed by science. Consciousness, which is animated to function solely by creation energy via the personality, is on the one hand responsible in every form, not only for perceiving, judging and forming the experience of mental processes and states in all senses, but also for consciously recognizing something as knowledge and representing it through this. Consciousness is the creation energy energized factor that conveys real knowledge to every human being through the seeing, experiencing, and learning of reality and its undeniable truth. Sim Yase Silver Star Center, 14.50H, Wednesday, 19 March 2023. Billy.
So this is my work, which I have since written and passed on in a slightly different way. But this is the original. What do you think about it?
What do you want me to say? Well, I think you've written something good that can really help if your words are followed. But Ptah understands this better than I do because he dealt with such things.
Do you have human beings with such problems?
No, we do not have to deal with that. But Ptah has been dealing with it ever since he made this problem his study, for ever since he came to you here on Earth, and you told him about this and that, he has been dealing with it. But now, dear friend, I must go my way. In order to dictate to you everything I have recorded today, I will be coming round several times over the next few days. But now I really have to go. Farewell and goodbye, Edward, dear friend.
Then goodbye, and take care, Quetzal, my friend.